One day you wake up and realize something almost scary. You don't need anyone's approval to breathe. And the weird part is, it feels calm, not bitter. Picture it like a scene from a film. Nothing exploded. No breakup speech. No dramatic exit. You still go to work, still answer texts, still show up to dinner, but the hunger to be picked is gone. The room can keep talking, and you don't feel that old itch to prove you belong. For most of your life, belonging felt like oxygen, direction, safety, a place to stand. Then quietly, something shifts. You stop hunting for a seat at the table, and you stop asking where you fit. Pasted. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. So let's stay with it for a moment. At first, this can feel almost empty, like someone turned down the volume on your social identity. You might wonder, am I becoming cold? Am I pulling away from life? Did something important break inside me? That question is natural, because the old version of you measured health by connection and closeness. But what if this is not a loss? What if it's a release? Jung believed there comes a point when your identity stops being borrowed from the collective and starts forming from within, what he called standing on your own inner ground. Pasted. And if you've ever felt this shift, you already know it doesn't feel like quitting, it feels like coming home. Here's the part most people misunderstand. Not needing to belong doesn't mean you hate people. It means you've stopped handing your self-worth to the crowd like loose change. You can still care, still laugh, still show up, but you no longer disappear inside the room to keep the room comfortable. In Stoic language, this is the moment you begin living from what's yours, your judgment, your values, your choices, rather than what's theirs, their reactions, their status games, their shifting opinions. The Stoics didn't teach isolation. They taught sovereignty. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything, and it's worth looking at closely. Think about how fitting in actually works in real life. It's not always obvious. It's the tiny edits you make to your personality so nobody gets uncomfortable. It's laughing at a joke you don't respect. It's nodding along in a meeting when your conscience is quietly disagreeing. It's the way you soften your truth so the group can stay relaxed. Many people don't call this performing. They call it being mature, being easy, being polite. But after years of those small edits, you can feel split. One version of you is social, agreeable, readable. Another version is private, silent, waiting. When that split becomes too expensive, the psyche doesn't always scream. It often just stops craving the applause. And that's where the quiet day begins. Now let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're at a family gathering. Same table, same stories, same roles. Someone expects you to be the funny one, the peacemaker, the achiever, the one who never makes it awkward. And you could do it, you've done it 1,000 times. But this time you notice something. You're tired of being predictable. Not because your family is wrong, but because you're done shrinking to stay understood. You listen, you smile, you stay respectful, but inside, you don't reach for belonging like you used to. That doesn't make you harsh. It makes you honest. And when you finally stop forcing yourself to be digestible, a strange peace can move in, and that peace is the doorway. This is where Jung and Stoicism actually shake hands. Jung would say, the ego loves belonging because it stabilizes identity. The Stoics would say, your peace was never supposed to depend on being included. When you build your life on externals' approval, reputation, social belonging, you're basically renting your sense of self. And rent can go up at any time. The minute the group changes its mood, you feel it in your chest. The Stoic move is to relocate your home base inward, to measure yourself by your character, not your popularity, by your integrity, not your invitations. That's not a motivational poster, that's a survival strategy for the second half of life, and it starts with a quiet internal pivot. But let's be honest. This pivot doesn't always feel inspiring at first. Sometimes it feels like a blank space. When the urge to fit in fades, you may feel unanchored, like you've lost a map you didn't even realize you were using. If you're not chasing belonging, what are you chasing? If you're not playing a role, who are you on an ordinary Tuesday? This is why people mislabel the moment as withdrawal. They assume less social hunger means less life, but often it means the opposite. You're no longer burning energy on performance, so you can finally hear what you actually want. And when that noise drops, the real questions show up quiet, precise, and impossible to ignore. So if you've reached this day where you don't feel pulled to belong, don't rush to fix it. Don't panic and assume something is wrong with you. Ask better questions. What have you been doing for years just to stay acceptable? What part of you have you been editing to keep the peace? And here's the most important one. If nobody judged you, if nobody rewarded you, if nobody punished you, what would you choose? That question is not rebellious. It's mature. It's the mind stepping into adulthood, the soul stepping into ownership, and it's exactly why this moment can be one of the most important shifts a person ever experiences. Pasted. Because this isn't about moving away from life. It's about moving toward yourself, steady, respectful, and finally real. And to understand why this quiet day arrives in the first place, we have to go back to the earlier season of your life when belonging wasn't a weakness at all, but a kind of survival. Before you ever learned who you are, you learned what you had to be to stay accepted. Let's rewind for a second. Not to shame the part of you that wanted to fit in, because that part wasn't weak. It was wise. In the early chapters of life, belonging isn't a luxury. It's survival. A child doesn't enter the world with a finished identity. You enter the world unfinished, open, sensitive, and dependent. And the first question your nervous system asks isn't, "Who am I?" It's, "Am I safe here? Do I matter? Will I be kept or abandoned?" That's why the need to belong is so powerful. It isn't just social. It's biological. It's emotional. It's a blueprint your mind uses to stay alive. Jung would say we don't build the ego in isolation. We build it in reflection. Like a mirror. People's faces, their reactions, their praise, their disappointment, all of that becomes feedback. Over time, you learn, when I speak like this, they smile. When I act like that, they withdraw. So you adjust, you polish, you edit, you become readable, and little by little, a personality forms not only from your nature, but from what the world rewards. That's what fitting in really is. The ego learning how to survive in a tribe. And for a long time, that's not a problem. It's how you learn the rules of the human world. Now here's a scene you'll recognize. You're young, maybe in school, maybe in your first job. You watch how people get treated. You notice which opinions get applause and which ones get you labeled too much. You feel the heat when you're misunderstood. So you start making small moves. You hold back a joke. You change your tone. You avoid a topic. You laugh a second longer than you feel. Nothing dramatic, just tiny adjustments. But those adjustments add up. And the truth is, most of us were trained into belonging before we were trained into authenticity. This is exactly where Stoicism adds a deeper layer. The Stoics understood something most of us learn too late. Human beings crave approval because we think it creates stability. But approval is outside your control. It's an external. And anything external can shift overnight. Marcus Aurelius warned that if you live for the crowd, you'll become a servant to the crowd's mood. Not because people are evil, but because human opinion is unstable by nature. So, in Stoic terms, belonging can be helpful at first, but it becomes dangerous when it turns into your foundation. If your peace depends on being included, then your peace is never really yours. Still, the important point is this. Belonging does serve a purpose early on. It gives your life structure when your inner world is still chaotic. It gives you a sense of direction when you don't yet trust your own judgment. It gives you an identity before you've built one from the inside. You become the responsible one, the achiever, the nice one, the strong one, the funny one. And those roles can protect you. They can earn you love. They can open doors. They can keep you connected. When you're still shaky inside, belonging functions like scaffolding around a building that isn't finished yet. But here's the shadow side nobody talks about. The same scaffolding that holds you up can also keep you from growing. Because the ego learns a quiet rule, sometimes without words. Be this, and you'll be loved. Be that, and you might lose people. So you start confusing acceptance with self-worth. You start confusing being needed with being valued. You start confusing I'm included with I'm safe. And if you're watching this, there's a good chance you've lived that pattern. Not because you were needy, because you were human. Let me ask you something that might hit a little deeper. When was the first time you felt you had to earn your place? Maybe it was at home. Maybe it was at school. Maybe it was after you made a mistake and felt the temperature change in the room. Most people don't remember the exact day. They just remember the feeling, that invisible pressure to be good, to be easy, to be impressive, to be low maintenance. And the mind learns fast. It learns to perform what keeps connection intact. Jung would call this the early architecture of the ego, built through comparison, relationship, and feedback. The ego is not born fully formed. It's assembled. And belonging is one of its main construction tools. It tells you where you stand. It tells you what's acceptable. It tells you what version of you gets love. In that sense, belonging is not simply social comfort, it's psychological structure. It's the framework that helps you become someone before you have the inner strength to become yourself. And again, this isn't a tragedy. It's a stage. It's normal. It's even necessary. But it becomes a problem when the stage never ends. Because sooner or later, life asks for more than a role. It asks for a real person. So if you've ever looked back and realized, I spent years becoming what worked, don't judge yourself. That was your mind trying to build stability with the tools it had. The awakening isn't in rejecting belonging, it's in understanding what belonging was doing for you and what it eventually started costing you. Because the moment you understand why you needed belonging in the first place, you're ready for the next turning point when belonging stops being shelter and starts becoming a cage. One day you realize the place that once saved you is now slowly suffocating you. It doesn't happen with a fight. It happens with a quiet fatigue you can't explain. You're still included. People still invite you. You still smile in the right moments. But somewhere inside, you feel yourself getting smaller. The room feels louder, yet you feel less present. And for the first time, you notice a painful truth. What used to feel like belonging now feels like a cage. Here's how it begins. At first, belonging protects you. It gives you shape when you're still forming. It gives you rules when life feels chaotic. But over time, your inner world expands. You start seeing more, feeling more. You start asking bigger questions. And the structure that once held you up starts to feel tight, like clothing that fit perfectly years ago, but now restricts your breath. Not because the group became bad, but because you outgrew the version of yourself that needed constant approval. And the scariest part is that nobody outside can see it. From the outside, you look fine. You're functioning. You're polite. You're easy to be around. But inside, you begin making tiny compromises that slowly drain you. You soften your truth so people don't get uncomfortable. You hide your depth because it changes the mood. You avoid certain topics because the room doesn't know how to hold them. You learn which questions to never ask out loud. And eventually, silence feels safer than honesty. That's the first sign the cage is formed. When your real self becomes a liability. Let me paint a scene. You're with friends, and the conversation is light work, drama, jokes, surface-level opinions. Someone says something that doesn't sit right with you. Not evil, just shallow. And you feel that moment inside you, the moment where you could speak with clarity. But you don't. You choose the smooth path. You nod. You laugh. You let it pass. Then later, driving home, you feel this heavy emptiness and you don't even know why. Nothing happened. But something did. You abandoned a small piece of yourself to keep belonging intact. And if you've done that enough times, your nervous system starts craving solitude, not because you hate people, but because being alone is the only place you don't have to perform. That relief you feel when you finally close the door behind you, that's not laziness. That's your psyche exhaling. Jung would call this the conflict between adaptation and individuation. Adaptation is the part of you that learns the social dance, how to be accepted, how to fit, how to stay connected. Individuation is different. It's the slow inner process of becoming whole, of living from the center of who you are, not from the edges of what people expect. And here's the painful truth. You cannot fully individuate while you are constantly adapting to keep your place, because individuation requires honesty, and adaptation often rewards comfort. So what happens? The cage tightens, not because anyone locks it, but because the unspoken contract becomes heavier. Don't be too intense. Don't change too much. Don't make it deep. Don't disrupt the vibe. Stay the version of you we understand. And if you've ever felt guilty for changing, this is why. People aren't always rejecting you, they're rejecting the uncertainty your growth creates inside their world. Your evolution forces them to update their picture of you, and most people would rather keep the old image because it's easier. Now, Stoicism gives you a powerful lens here. Stoics believe the deepest freedom is not escaping society, it's escaping dependency on society's approval. Because the more your identity relies on being liked, the more you become controlled by what other people can give or take away. And here's the trap. When belonging becomes your emotional oxygen, you will do anything to protect it, even if it costs your integrity. You will trade truth for peace. You will trade depth for comfort. You will trade your values for connection. And the Stoics would call that slavery, quiet slavery, polite slavery, but still slavery. That may sound intense, but look at the evidence. When you feel you must act a certain way to stay accepted, you are no longer living freely. You are managing a persona. Not a fake you, just a reduced you. And the most exhausting part is that you can't talk about it because the cage doesn't have bars you can point to. It's made of social expectations, roles, and invisible rules. So you start doing what many grown adults do. You don't leave dramatically. You disengage. You answer slower. You show up less. You keep it polite, but you stop offering your real energy. You stop fighting for a seat that no longer fits your soul. This is what maturity often looks like from the outside. Not conflict, but quiet withdrawal of investment. And yes, fear plays a role. The cage stays intact because the price of leaving feels high. If you stop adapting, will you lose people? If you stop performing, will you be misunderstood? If you stop shrinking, will you end up alone? Those fears are real, and they deserve respect. But here's the awakening. There is a deeper loneliness than being alone, and it's the loneliness of being surrounded by people while hiding your true self. So the question isn't, how do I keep belonging? The real question is, how much of myself am I willing to lose just to stay included? Because the moment you ask that question honestly, something begins to shift. The cage doesn't open all at once, but you stop gripping the bars. You stop defending the role. You start reclaiming your inner space. And that's where real strength begins, not in rebellion, not in cutting people off, but in refusing to betray yourself quietly. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens after you stop chasing belonging, why it can feel empty at first, and why that emptiness might actually be the doorway to your inner ground. One day you stop scanning the room for permission, and you realize you've been free for a long time, you just forgot. It's a strange moment, almost invisible from the outside. You still show up, you still talk, you still smile when it's genuine. But inside, something has changed. The hunger to be accepted is gone. Not because you're numb, not because you're arrogant, but because you finally tasted something deeper than approval alignment. Let's make this cinematic. You walk into a room, maybe a meeting, a party, a family dinner. In the past, your mind would instantly go to work like a hidden security camera. Who's in charge here? What mood is the group in? How do I need to act to stay safe? Where do I belong in this moment? Most people don't realize they do this. It happens automatically. It's an old survival program, your nervous system scanning for acceptance, like it's scanning for oxygen. But then one day, the program doesn't start. You notice the room, but you don't shapeshift for it. You speak when you mean it. You stay quiet when you don't. You're not cold, you're settled. And when that happens, the question changes. It's no longer, where do I fit in? It becomes, where do I resonate? Not, where will they accept me? But where do I stay whole? This is what real self-ownership feels like. You stop asking for permission to be yourself. Your psyche has its own gravity now, quiet, steady, undeniable. You don't join everything just to feel included. You choose carefully. You participate when it matters. You step back when it doesn't. And the best part? You don't need to announce it. You just live it. Stoicism has a wordless way of describing this shift. You stop living outward. You stop letting the room set your inner weather. Epictetus would remind you that other people's reactions are not your property. Their approval is not a guarantee. Their disapproval is not a verdict. So you begin moving through life with a different anchor. Not applause, not belonging, but character. Not, do they like me? But am I acting with integrity? That one shift can save years of emotional exhaustion. But here's the hard part, and this is where Jung goes deeper. Leaving the need to belong doesn't just mean you change your habits. It means you leave something psychological, what Jung would call the collective identity. And that doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes you still stay in the same city, the same job, the same family. But internally, you stop signing the invisible contract, the contract that says, you're allowed to be this version of yourself, 2, 5, or 8. You're allowed to feel these emotions, but not those. You can ask certain questions, but not the ones that make people uncomfortable. You can grow, as long as you don't outgrow us. That's collective identity. It's the shared agreement that keeps groups stable, because stability feels safe. And to be clear, it's not always malicious. It's just how humans protect a sense of order. But if you've ever felt that subtle pressure to stay predictable, you've felt the contract. Now, the tool we use to survive inside that contract is something Jung called the persona, the social mask. And let's be fair, the persona is not evil. It's necessary. It helps you function. It helps you communicate. It helps you keep relationships smooth. It helps you be professional. It helps you be understood. But the danger is when the mask becomes your face. When you identify with the persona too strongly, you don't just hide your depth from others, you lose access to it yourself. You start believing you are only the role you play, the strong one, the calm one, the helpful one, the agreeable one. And because everyone praises you for it, you keep wearing it, even when it costs you your truth. Individuation, the Jungian path of becoming whole, is not about destroying the persona. It's about loosening your grip on it, using it when needed, than returning home to your real inner life. It's learning to be socially skilled without being spiritually homeless. And this shift fit to alignment often changes your relationships in ways that surprise you. Some people won't like it. Not because you did something wrong, but because your presence is no longer easy to manipulate. You stop over-explaining. You stop begging to be understood. You stop negotiating your worth. You also stop reacting the way you used to. Imagine someone throws a passive comment at you, something designed to hook you. The old you might have tried to fix it, prove yourself, or smooth it over. The aligned you does something different. You pause. You breathe. You let the comment fall to the ground. You don't pick it up. That's Stoic discipline in real time. And it's not coldness, it's clarity. Here's a question that can change your life if you answer it honestly. When you walk into a room, do you become more like yourself or less? Because that question reveals everything. If you leave a place feeling drained, smaller, edited, your soul is giving you data. If you leave a place feeling clearer, steadier, more honest, your psyche is telling you the truth. And this is where alignment becomes a form of respect. Not only for yourself, but for others too. Because when you stop performing, you give people something rare, the chance to meet the real you. Some relationships won't survive that, but the ones that do become cleaner, deeper, and more peaceful. Now, there's one more twist that almost everyone experiences after this shift. When you stop chasing belonging, life can feel strangely quiet, almost empty, like the old music stopped and you're standing in silence. And that silence is not punishment, it's space. It's the moment your inner ground begins to form. So if you're in that season where you don't crave the room the way you used to, don't rush to fill the gap. Don't force yourself back into a role just to feel normal. This is a threshold, a psychological doorway. The cost is uncertainty. The reward is authenticity. And in the next part, we're going to talk about that emptiness, why it feels unsettling at first, and why it might be the most sacred stage of your transformation. The emptiness you feel right now might not be a problem. It might be proof you're finally waking up. There's a moment after you stop chasing belonging that nobody warns you about. It doesn't look like freedom at first. It looks like silence, like a room after the music ends. Like you walked out of a crowded place and suddenly can hear your own footsteps again. And for many people, that moment is terrifying, not because anything is wrong, but because the old structure is gone. Here's what's really happening. For years, your rhythm was built around being included. Your weekends, your opinions, your identity, sometimes even your mood, were shaped by the groups you were part of. You had a role. You had a lane. You had a reason to show up. And when you step out of that pattern, when the hunger to fit fades, something collapses quietly. The schedule, the direction, the social gravity that used to pull you forward. So you wake up, and the day feels blank. Not depressed, not dramatic, just strangely open. You're not rushing to prove anything. You're not checking the room for your value. You're not playing the old games. But you also don't know what replaces them yet. That's why it can feel like emptiness. And if you're not careful, you'll label this as a failure. You'll say, "What's wrong with me?" But Jung would say, "Nothing is wrong." This is a transitional stage, the space between who you were and who you're becoming. The old center has fallen away, and the new center hasn't fully stabilized yet. That's not a lack, that's a threshold. Let me put it in plain language. You're in the hallway between two rooms. The first room is the old life, where you were held up by external structure. Expectations, roles, approval, belonging. The second room is the new life, where you're held up by something internal. Self-trust, values, inner ground. But the hallway feels cold because it's not designed for comfort. It's designed for change. This is why so many people panic here. They confuse open space with something missing. But open space is not the enemy. Open space is where the real you can finally form without being shaped by constant feedback. Stoicism would call this a moment of training. Because in Stoic terms, when externals stop controlling you, you don't immediately feel strong. You feel exposed. You feel like you lost your usual armor. And that's exactly why this stage matters. It's where you learn to stand without leaning on what the world gives you. It's where you practice being steady without needing constant stimulation, constant validation, constant noise. And yes, your mind will try to run back to the old system. It will whisper, just join something. Fill the calendar. Meet new people immediately. Stay busy so you don't have to feel this. Get back into a group so you don't feel invisible. That's the reflex. And it makes sense, because belonging used to regulate your nervous system. When it disappears, your system feels unmoored. So you reach for quick replacements. More activities, more scrolling, more social plans, more distraction. Not because you're weak, but because emptiness feels like danger to a mind that has lived on external structure. But here's the warning. This is the most important part of the segment. If you rush to fill the space too fast, you don't heal. You just install a new cage. It might be a new friend group, a new identity, a new hustle, a new community that feels inspiring for 3 weeks, and then starts demanding a performance again. Jung's point is that the self cannot form properly when the space is constantly occupied. The emptiness is not punishment, it's potential. It's psychological soil. And soil needs quiet. It needs time. It needs darkness, because that's where roots grow. Let me make this real. Imagine you've been in a loud house your whole life, TV on, people talking, always reacting. Then one day, you move into a quieter place. The silence feels unbearable at first. Not because silence is harmful, but because you're not used to hearing your own thoughts. You hear emotions you used to drown out. You notice needs you used to ignore. You hear the grief, the anger, the truth. That's what the transitional stage does. It reveals what the noise used to cover, and that's why it can feel uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always a sign you're going backwards. Sometimes it's a sign you've stopped running. So here's a question for you, one you should sit with, not answer quickly. When you're alone in the quiet, what do you notice that you normally avoid? That answer will tell you what your next chapter requires. Stoics would say, don't fear the feeling, observe it, name it, hold it with calm attention, because you are not your emotion. You are the one who can witness it, and that witnessing is power. The moment you can sit with emptiness without panicking, you stop being controlled by it. Now, I'm not saying you should isolate yourself or reject people. This isn't anti-belonging. This is about timing. If you've just stepped out of an old identity, don't immediately rush into a new one. Let the internal order rebuild. Let your values come forward. Let yourself become the foundation, not the crowd. Because when the emptiness is honored instead of avoided, something changes. You start to feel a quiet clarity. You begin to recognize what actually matters to you, not what impresses people. You start choosing from resonance, not from fear. And slowly, almost mysteriously, a new center begins to form inside you. That's the transformation nobody can fake. And if you're in this stage right now, here's the message that can change your perspective. The emptiness is not evidence that you lost yourself. It may be evidence that you're finally meeting yourself without the noise. In the next part, we'll talk about what that new center feels like, what Jung called inner ground, and how it changes the way you make decisions, set boundaries, and connect with others without losing yourself again. The day you stop needing to be understood by everyone is the day you finally become unshakable. Not loud, not arrogant, not confident in the way the internet sells confidence. I'm talking about a quieter kind of strength, the kind you can feel in someone's presence before they even speak. Jung called it inner ground. And if you've ever met a person like this, you know what it looks like. They don't rush, they don't beg, they don't defend their existence. They stand. Here's the twist. Inner ground is not certainty. It's not the absence of fear. It's not, I have all the answers. It's a sense of coherence, your inner life matching your outer life, your values matching your choices, your words matching your actions. When that alignment happens, the world can still be noisy, but you stop being easily moved. Let me bring you into a scene. You're sitting across from someone, maybe a coworker, a friend, a family member. They say something subtle, a little judgment, a little push. In the past, that comment would have hooked you. Your mind would spin all night. Did I say something wrong? Do they like me? Should I explain myself? You would replay the conversation like a courtroom trial, trying to prove you're innocent. But now, something is different. You feel the comment land, and you feel your body stay calm. You don't rush to defend. You don't shrink. You don't attack. You simply notice. That's their perception, and you let it be theirs. That is inner ground. Stoicism has a clean way of describing it. You return to what you can control, your judgment, your character, your actions, not their opinion, not the tone of the room, not the applause, not the misunderstanding. Marcus Aurelius wrote about being like a rock in a rushing river. Water moves around it, but the rock doesn't panic. That image isn't about being emotionless. It's about being anchored. And what creates that anchor is not positive thinking. It's practice. It's coherence. Because when your life is inconsistent, when you say one thing but do another, you become shaky inside. You become easy to manipulate, easy to shame, easy to pull off center. But when you live in alignment, you gain a quiet authority. You no longer need to over-explain yourself to feel legitimate. You don't need everyone to agree in order to trust your own direction. Now here's where Jung takes it deeper. Inner ground forms when you stop living as a performance and start living as a truth. You stop borrowing identity from the crowd. You stop editing yourself to fit a role. You stop outsourcing your worth. And slowly, almost invisibly, the psyche reorganizes. Not around belonging, but around the self. That's why your reactions change. You become less reactive, not because you don't feel, but because you don't get hijacked. A disagreement doesn't feel like a threat. A cold tone doesn't feel like rejection. A misunderstanding doesn't feel like danger. You can listen without collapsing. You can say no without guilt poisoning your stomach. You can walk away without feeling like you have to win, and the way you make decisions changes too. Instead of asking, will they approve? You start asking, does this resonate? Not in a vague, mystical way, more like a body-level truth. When something is right, it has a quiet yes. When it's wrong, you feel resistance, tightness, fatigue, confusion. Inner ground is the ability to trust that signal without needing external confirmation. Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine you're offered something that looks good on paper, a job title, a partnership, an invitation into a high-status circle. The old you might have said yes immediately because it proved something. It gave you a place. It gave you a story to tell. But the grounded you pauses. You ask, what will this require me to become? What will I have to pretend not to care about? What part of myself will I have to silence to stay here? And if the cost is your coherence, you decline, calmly, without drama, without needing to justify it to everyone. That is power most people never develop. Now here's the most beautiful part. Inner ground changes the way you love and connect. When you're unstable inside, You cling, you chase, you overgive to secure closeness. You fear distance because distance feels like abandonment. But when you're grounded, you care from fullness. You don't use connection to patch a hole. You offer presence without desperation. So your relationships become cleaner. You can be close without merging. You can support without losing yourself. You can care without controlling. You can miss someone without collapsing, and your boundaries stop feeling like walls. They become natural, like the edge of your own dignity. You don't announce them as threats. You live them as standards. People may not always like it, but they can feel it, and deep down, the right people respect it. Jung would say this is the moment you stop living as a fragment and start living as a whole. Stoicism would say this is the moment you stop being ruled by externals and start living by virtue. Different languages, same transformation. Now, if you're listening and thinking, I want that, here's the honest truth. Inner ground is built in the quiet moments, the moments when no one is watching, when you choose truth over comfort, when you don't betray yourself just to avoid tension, when you stop explaining and start embodying. Those small choices don't look heroic, but they create a self that can't be shaken by a comment, a trend, or a crowd. So here's the message I want to leave you with. You don't need to become louder to become stronger. You don't need to be feared to be respected. You don't need to win every room to win your life. The deepest strength is coherence, being the same person in private that you pretend to be in public. And once you taste that, you'll never go back to begging for belonging again. In the next part, we're going to talk about the quiet burden that comes with this growth, why some people misunderstand you when you become grounded, and how to stay compassionate without shrinking yourself. The moment you become truly grounded is the moment some people start misunderstanding you, not because you became rude, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped performing closeness the way they're used to seeing it. And that creates a quiet tension most people never talk about, the silent burden of growth. Here's how it shows up in real life. You change, but you don't announce it. You're still kind, still respectful, still present when it matters. Yet your energy is different, cleaner, calmer, less eager, and people feel it. They may not be able to explain it, but they sense a shift in your gravity. So they start guessing. Are you okay? You've been distant lately. You never call anymore. You used to be more fun. Revros. All. What happened to you? They're not always accusing you. Sometimes they're confused. Because many people measure closeness by frequency. How often you text, how often you show up, how quickly you reply, how available you are. In their world, love equals access. But in your new world, closeness is measured differently. It's measured by honesty, respect, alignment, and peace. You don't need constant contact to feel connected. You don't need daily reassurance to feel loyal. You don't need to be everywhere to be real. And that difference alone can make people feel like you've left them, even when you haven't. Let's make this cinematic. You're at home on a quiet evening. Your phone lights up. A group chat is active jokes, complaints, plans, noise. The old you would jump in instantly, not because you wanted to, but because you didn't want to disappear. You didn't want to be forgotten. You didn't want to lose your place. But now you look at it, and you don't feel pulled. You might respond later, or not at all. And suddenly, you notice something. You're not anxious about it. You're not begging to be included. You're not bargaining for belonging. That calm is new, but from the outside, someone sees silence and assumes rejection because they can't read your inner ground. All they see is less access. And to a person who equates access with love, less access feels like loss. Jung would say this is one of the hardest parts of individuation. It separates you from the collective logic, the unspoken rules of how people are supposed to be. Individuation pulls you away from what Jung called collective comprehension. In simple terms, the group can't easily understand what you're becoming because you no longer live by the group's emotional economy. You're not trading attention for approval anymore. You're not trading peace for acceptance. You're not negotiating your self-respect to keep things comfortable, and that's why explanation often fails. You can try to tell people, "I'm fine. I just need more space," but they hear, "You don't care." You can say, "I'm working on myself," but they hear, "You think you're better than us." You can say, "I'm tired of drama," but they hear, "You're judging me," because this isn't only a conversation problem. It's a perception problem. They're looking at your change through the old version of you, and the old version of you was easy to predict, easy to pull, easy to read. The new you is not. Now, Stoicism gives you a crucial principle here. You cannot control how you are interpreted. You can control your character, your intentions, your actions, but you cannot control someone else's story about you. Marcus Aurelius would call that a wasteful war, trying to manage opinions that don't belong to you. So what do? You stay human. You don't become cold. You don't punish people for misunderstanding. You don't turn growth into pride. You simply accept a mature truth. When you stop living for approval, you will sometimes be seen as distant by people who benefited from your old over-availability. And that doesn't automatically make them bad. It just means the relationship was partly built on a pattern. Your constant presence, your quick replies, your role as emotional caretaker, your predictable participation. When you change the pattern, the relationship has to update, or it will resist. This is where the quiet burden appears, because deep down, you want to be understood. You want people to see that you're not rejecting them. You're finally choosing yourself. But individuation is not a performance you can explain into existence. It's an experience. It's lived. It's embodied. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is to let people misunderstand you without becoming bitter. Let me ask you a question that can reveal the truth instantly. When you set a boundary, do they try to understand it, or do they try to punish you for it? That answer tells you whether the closeness was built on respect or on access. And here's the part that will transform how you see this. Being misunderstood is often the fee you pay for becoming real. Not forever, but for a season. Because as you become more grounded, you naturally become more selective. You stop sharing everything. You stop explaining every decision. You stop begging people to see your heart. And that can feel lonely at first. But over time, something beautiful happens. The people who are also learning to belong to themselves, the ones building their own inner ground, will recognize you. They won't demand you stay small. They won't confuse your peace with distance. They won't require constant proof to feel secure around you. They'll feel your calm and respect it. So if you're carrying this quiet burden right now, being misunderstood, while trying to become whole, don't rush to fix it by shrinking back. Don't return to the old performance just to regain comfort. Stay kind, stay clear, stay steady, because one day you'll realize something that changes your life. The right people don't need you to perform closeness. They can feel your sincerity even in your silence. And in the next part, we'll bring all of this home, why the final stage of freedom isn't belonging nowhere, but belonging to yourself so deeply that you can connect without losing who you are. If you've ever felt like you don't belong anywhere, what if that's not a curse? What if it's the beginning of freedom? Because the real fear isn't being alone. The real fear is believing you need a place, a group, or someone's approval to feel whole. Most people spend their entire lives trying to be chosen by friends, by partners, by communities, by the world, and they call that a normal life. But deep down, they're exhausted, not from work, from performing, from constantly adjusting, from living like their worth depends on being included. And then, one day, something changes. It can be quiet, it can be slow, but it's unmistakable. You stop panicking when you're not invited. You stop needing constant proof that you matter. You stop bargaining for a seat at tables where your soul feels cramped. And that's when you realize not belonging everywhere is not the same as belonging nowhere. There's a difference. Belonging nowhere is emptiness without meaning. Belonging to yourself is wholeness without permission. That's the destination, not isolation, not bitterness, not cutting people off. Jung would call it integration, where the parts of you that used to fight for approval finally come home, where your identity is no longer built from the collective, but from the self, where you can stand inside your own life without needing the crowd to validate your existence. And Stoicism would call it something even simpler: freedom. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is no longer being controlled by what you can't control. Other people's opinions, their moods, their invitations, their silence, their approval, their misunderstanding. Those are externals. The Stoics warn that if you build your peace on externals, you will always be vulnerable because externals can change in a single afternoon. But when you belong to yourself, you move differently. You don't chase. You choose. You don't beg. You build. You don't perform closeness. You offer presence. And that changes your whole life in practical ways. Your relationships become calmer because you're not using people to fill a hole. You can love without clinging. You can care without losing your center. You can walk away from disrespect without turning it into a war. Your boundaries stop being arguments and start being standards. And the world feels less threatening because you no longer need the world to agree with you in order to trust yourself. Here's the most important shift. Mature belonging becomes a choice, not a requirement for stability. You still connect, you still laugh, you still build community, but now it comes from fullness, not fear. You don't need to be picked to feel real. You don't need constant inclusion to feel safe. You don't measure your value by how many people remember you because you remember yourself. That's why life becomes simpler, not easier, but cleaner. You stop chasing 10 half relationships and start protecting 2 real ones. You stop living in noise and start living in clarity. You stop explaining your soul to people who only want your mask. And the irony is, when you stop begging to belong, you finally start attracting the kind of relationships that don't require you to shrink. The right people don't demand performance. They respect your pace. They understand your silence. They feel your sincerity even when you're not available 24/7. Now let me speak to the person watching who still feels that old ache, the ache of, why don't I fit anywhere? Listen carefully. You are not broken because you don't fit in shallow spaces. You are not wrong because you outgrew what used to feel safe. And you are not losing your life because you're becoming more selective. Sometimes, not fitting in is the proof that you're becoming real. This is the part you may want to replay later. The goal is not to find a place where you can belong while hiding parts of yourself. The goal is to become so anchored inside that you can belong anywhere without abandoning who you are. That's belonging to yourself. And when you reach that, you stop being afraid of not belonging, because you're held from within. You're no longer floating, waiting to be rescued by a group, a relationship, or a label. You have inner ground. You have coherence. You have dignity. So if this video described your season, if you've felt the quiet day, the cage, the emptiness, the shift into alignment, the misunderstandings, and the new steadiness, then you're not alone. You're not going backwards. You're moving through a transformation that most people never name, but many secretly live. And if you want more videos like this, about Stoic strength, Jungian growth, and the quiet psychology of becoming whole, then take a second to support the channel. Like this video so it reaches someone who needs it. Share it with a friend who feels out of place but doesn't know why. And subscribe if you want weekly lessons that help you build inner ground, healthier boundaries, and a calmer mind. Because the truth is, you don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself until your life becomes a place you finally belong. And in the next video, we'll go even deeper into the subtle signs you're outgrowing an old identity, and how to rebuild a life that fits your soul without sacrificing your peace.